After her dad, who was an alpha king, died, husband cast out. Pregnant wife. To marry Mistress. The great hall of Ashford Castle fell silent as Lord Edmund Blackwood's boots echoed against the stone floor. Winter had come early to Virginia that year, and frost clung to the tall windows like skeletal fingers. Catherine Blackwood stood before the fireplace, her hand instinctively moving to her swollen belly, 5 months along, though she'd kept it hidden beneath her heavy gowns for weeks now. She'd planned to tell Edmund tonight, during the feast celebrating her late father's memory. King Harold of Ashford had been dead only 3 months, and already everything he'd built was crumbling. Catherine. Edmund's voice was cold, nothing like the man who'd courted her so ardently 2 years ago. We need to speak. She turned to face her husband, searching his gray eyes for the warmth that had once resided there. Instead, she found only stone. Behind him, the door remained open, and through it, she could see the household servants gathered in unusual numbers, their faces a mixture of pity and curiosity. If you're watching this from anywhere in the world, please take a moment to subscribe and leave a comment telling us where you're from. Now, let's continue with Catherine's story. Edmund, I have news, she began, but he raised his hand to silence her. There's no easy way to say this. He moved to the window, unable to meet her gaze. Our marriage was a political arrangement. Your father's kingdom provided me with lands and title. Now that he's gone, and with no male heir to claim his crown, those agreements mean nothing. Catherine's breath caught in her throat. What are you saying? Lady Margot Sinclair has agreed to become my wife. She brings with her the Eastern Territories and an alliance with the coastal lords. Our union will be dissolved by week's end. He finally turned to face her, and she saw something else in his expression now. Guilt, perhaps, but not enough to change his mind. I'm carrying your child, Catherine said quietly, the words falling like stones into a well. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered in Edmund's face. Then it was gone, replaced by a harder mask. That changes nothing. Margot is already preparing to take her place as Lady of Ashford. You'll be provided a small cottage on the eastern border and a modest allowance. It's more than generous, considering. Considering what? Catherine's voice rose despite herself. Considering you're throwing away your wife and unborn child for land and power. My father made you a lord, Edmund. He trusted you with his daughter's future. Your father is dead, Edmund said flatly. And in these times, sentiment is a luxury none of us can afford. The winter stores are low. Raiders from the Western Territories grow bolder each week, and the Northern Lords question my authority daily. Margot's dowry and connections will secure Ashford's future. Your father's legacy will live on through the stability this new alliance brings. Catherine felt the room spinning. She gripped the edge of a chair for support. When? She whispered. You leave at dawn. The cottage is ready. Sarah will accompany you as your maid. I'll send 2 guards and ensure you have provisions for the winter. He moved toward the door, then paused. I'm not a cruel man, Catherine. But I am lord of these lands now, and I must think of the hundreds of families who depend on this estate. One woman's happiness, even yours, cannot outweigh their survival. That night, Catherine packed by candlelight in the chambers that had been hers for 2 years. The room seemed larger now, emptier, though nothing had been removed yet. Sarah, her lady's maid since childhood, moved quietly about the space, folding gowns and wrapping Catherine's few pieces of jewelry and cloth. My lady, Sarah said softly, her weathered hands pausing over a blue silk dress. I served your mother before she passed, and your grandmother before her. Your father would never have allowed this. My father is gone, Catherine replied, echoing Edmund's words, though they tasted bitter on her tongue. She moved to the window, looking out over the snow-covered grounds. Torches burned in the courtyard, where workers were already bringing in carts loaded with trunks and furniture. Margot's belongings, no doubt. Everything he built, everything he stood for, Edmund is erasing it all for political convenience. Not everything, my lady. Sarah came to stand beside her, following her gaze. You carry your father's grandchild. That's something Lord Edmund can't erase, no matter how hard he tries. Catherine placed both hands on her belly, feeling the slight firmness there. A child born in exile, with no claim to anything. What kind of legacy is that? The kind that begins with survival, Sarah said firmly. And tomorrow, that's exactly what we'll focus on, one day at a time. The journey to the eastern border cottage took 3 days through increasingly harsh weather. The 2 guards Edmund had assigned, William, an older knight who'd served her father, and Thomas, a younger man with kind eyes, rode ahead and behind their small wagon. The wind cut through Catherine's heaviest cloak, and more than once she wondered if Edmund had chosen the most remote location possible deliberately. The cottage, when they finally reached it, was better than she'd feared, but worse than she'd hoped. Stone walls, a thatched roof, 2 small rooms, and a root cellar. A thin stream of smoke rose from the chimney. Someone had at least prepared a fire. The surrounding forest pressed close on 3 sides, dark pines heavy with snow. It's cozy, Sarah said diplomatically, as William helped them down from the wagon. It's a prison, Catherine replied, but she forced herself to straighten her shoulders. But it's our prison, and we'll make the best of it. Thomas began unloading their supplies while William checked the perimeter of the property. Inside, the cottage was warmer than expected. Someone had stocked the shelves with basic provisions: flour, dried meat, root vegetables, candles. There was a narrow bed in one room, a straw mattress in the other, a rough wooden table and 2 chairs. The fireplace was large enough to heat the main space, and a smaller brazier sat in the bedroom. My lady, William said, appearing in the doorway. There's a village about 2 miles south. Small place, mostly farmers and woodcutters. Thomas and I will take turns riding there weekly to purchase what you need and carry messages if required. Messages to whom? Catherine asked with a hollow laugh. I have no one left. Everyone has someone, William replied. Your father had many friends, my lady. Not all of them have forgotten. Over the following weeks, Catherine fell into a new rhythm of life so different from her days at Ashford Castle that it might have been happening to someone else. She learned to cook simple meals, to mend her own clothes, to carry water from the nearby stream. Her body changed rapidly, now that she'd stopped hiding her pregnancy, and Sarah fussed over her constantly. Word of her exile had spread through the local village. At first, the cottagers were suspicious of the noble lady cast out by her lord husband. But Catherine made it a point to attend the small church each Sunday, to nod politely to the families she passed, to never act as if her former station made her better than them. Slowly, cautiously, they began to warm to her. It was Margaret, the miller's wife, who first offered friendship. She appeared at the cottage door one gray afternoon with a basket of fresh bread and a knowing look at Catherine's expanding waistline. I had 4, she said without preamble, pushing past Catherine into the cottage. Lost 2, kept 2. You'll need someone who knows what to expect when your time comes. I can't pay you, Catherine said, though relief flooded through her at the offer. Didn't ask you to. Margaret set the bread on the table and looked around the small cottage with approval. You're keeping it clean. That's good. Clean is important for childbirth. When are you due? Early spring, I think. March, perhaps April. Then we have time to prepare. Margaret pulled out one of the wooden chairs and sat down as if she belonged there. I'll teach you what you need to know. In exchange, maybe you teach my daughter to read. I hear you noble ladies know your letters. It was the beginning of what Catherine would later recognize as her salvation. Margaret's friendship opened other doors. Soon, Elizabeth from the cobbler's family was stopping by to share gossip and teach Catherine to garden. Young Anne, whose father was the blacksmith, came to learn reading and stayed to help with heavy chores. Even old Gerald, the woodcutter, began leaving extra firewood by her door without comment. William, true to his word, made weekly trips to the village and to Ashford. He brought news that Catherine wasn't sure she wanted to hear. Edmund had married Margot Sinclair in a lavish ceremony. The Eastern lords had formally recognized the alliance. Preparations were underway for spring planting that would supposedly revolutionize the estate's productivity. "And they speak of you," William added one evening as Catherine prepared a simple stew over the fire. "I can't imagine they speak well." "They speak with confusion," William said carefully. "Many remember King Harold. They remember how he ruled with fairness and wisdom. They see Lord Edmund's treatment of you and wonder what kind of man casts out his pregnant wife for political gain." "The kind who values power over people," Catherine said bitterly, stirring the pot with more force than necessary. "Perhaps. Or perhaps the kind who will learn that power built on betrayal has shallow foundations." Winter deepened, and Catherine's body grew heavier. By January, she could no longer hide her condition even under her loosest gowns. The child moved constantly now, strong kicks that both thrilled and frightened her. She was bringing a baby into a world of uncertainty, with no father to claim it, no inheritance to secure its future. But she wasn't alone. That realization came to her one evening, as she sat by the fire with Sarah mending clothes, Margaret demonstrating how to fold swaddling clothes, and Elizabeth humming a lullaby her own mother had sung. These women owed her nothing. They chose to be here, to help her, to stand with her when her own husband had abandoned her. "Why?" Catherine asked suddenly. The other women looked up from their work. "Why do you help me? You don't owe me anything. My father's crown is gone. I have no power, no wealth to share." Margaret set down the cloth she'd been folding. "You come to church each week and sit in the back pew, not demanding the front, as is your right by birth. When Thomas brings supplies from the village, you always send back something in return. Mended clothes, preserved vegetables, whatever you can manage. Last month, when the carpenter's son broke his arm, you tore up one of your own petticoats for bandages because you had no other cloth to spare." "Those are small things," Catherine protested. "Small things are how we know a person's character," Elizabeth said. "Your husband threw you away because you were no longer useful to him. You could have become bitter and cruel. Instead, you chose to be kind. That matters to us." Sarah, who'd been silent until now, added quietly, "Your father used to say that a crown doesn't make a king. Character does. You may have lost your title, my lady, but you haven't lost what truly made you your father's daughter." Catherine felt tears burn behind her eyes. She blinked them back, focusing instead on the fire. "My child will be born without a name, without a future." "Your child will be born surrounded by people who already love it," Margaret corrected. "And as for a future, well, we'll see about that. The world has a way of turning in unexpected directions." February brought the harshest storms of the season. For 3 days, snow fell so thickly that Catherine couldn't see the tree line from her window. The cottage grew cold despite the fire, and she spent hours wrapped in every blanket they owned, feeling the baby move inside her, and wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake in not fighting harder against Edmund's decree. On the third night, when the wind howled like wolves outside, and the fire burned low, there was a knock at the door. Sarah and Catherine exchanged frightened looks. No one traveled in weather like this unless desperate or dangerous. William's voice called out, "Lady Catherine, it's me. I've brought someone." Catherine nodded to Sarah, who unbarred the door. William stumbled in, covered in snow, and behind him came a figure wrapped in a hooded cloak. The visitor threw back their hood to reveal a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and gray-streaked hair pulled back severely from her weathered face. Lady Catherine Blackwood, the woman said, her voice cultured despite her travel-worn appearance. I apologize for the dramatic entrance. I am Beatrice of Westmarch. I served your father as advisor for 15 years. I've been searching for you since I heard of your exile. Catherine stared at her. She vaguely remembered Lady Beatrice from court, a quiet woman who'd often stood at her father's right hand during council meetings. Why? Because your father's last wishes are being ignored, Beatrice said bluntly, accepting a cup of hot water from Sarah with a grateful nod. And because you need to know the full truth of what's happening at Ashford. She pulled a leather satchel from beneath her cloak and withdrew several rolled documents. Your father wrote a will 3 days before he died. In it, he specified that if he died without a male heir, the kingdom would pass to you, his daughter, with full rights and privileges. He also specified that any marriage you entered into would require your spouse to take an oath of partnership, not ownership. Edmund never took that oath. Edmund told me the will was invalid, Catherine said slowly. That without a male heir, the traditional laws would supersede any written wishes. He lied. Beatrice spread the documents on the table. Your father anticipated such arguments. He gathered signatures from every major lord and lady within the kingdom, each one acknowledging his right to name his own successor regardless of gender. This document, she tapped a particularly official-looking scroll, was witnessed and sealed by the Archbishop himself. Catherine moved closer to the table, her heart pounding. Why didn't you come forward when Edmund made his announcement? I tried, Beatrice said grimly. Edmund had me removed from court and threatened with imprisonment if I persisted. But I made copies of everything first. Hidden copies. In case something like this happened. She looked at Catherine with fierce intensity. Your father saw Edmund's true nature before the end. That's why he wrote such a specific will. He was trying to protect you. Then why didn't he say something to me? Catherine whispered. He died believing Edmund would honor his commitment to you, Beatrice replied softly. He thought love and duty would be enough. He was wrong. The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Catherine stared at the documents, at her father's seal pressed into red wax, at the carefully written words that should have protected her future. What good does this do now? Edmund has already married Margot. He's consolidated his power. Who would support a pregnant, exiled woman against an established lord? More people than you might think, Beatrice said. There's growing unrest at Ashford. The promised prosperity from Margot's dowry hasn't materialized. The Eastern lords she supposedly brought as allies are making demands Edmund can't meet. Meanwhile, your father's old council members are being pushed out, replaced with Margot's relatives who know nothing of governing. The estate is struggling, and people are beginning to question Edmund's decisions. Let them question, Catherine said bitterly. I'm in no position to challenge anyone. I can barely manage this cottage and my pregnancy. Now, perhaps, Beatrice acknowledged. But children grow, situations change, and truth has a way of outlasting lies. She carefully rolled up the documents and placed them back in her satchel, then pulled out a smaller package. Your father left something else for you. He gave it to me for safekeeping months before he died, with instructions to deliver it only if you ever truly needed it. The package was wrapped in oiled cloth. Catherine unwrapped it slowly to reveal a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with her father's familiar handwriting. The first page bore a simple inscription. For Catherine, when the world feels impossible. Her vision blurred with tears. I can't read this now. Then save it for when you can, Beatrice said gently. She stood, pulling her cloak back around her shoulders. I can't stay. If Edmund discovers I've contacted you, it will only make things worse for both of us. But I'll be in Millbrook, 2 days' ride northeast. If you ever need me, send word through William. And Catherine? She waited until Catherine looked up. Your father believed you had the strength to lead. That hasn't changed, no matter what Edmund claims. After Beatrice left, Catherine sat by the fire holding her father's journal. Sarah urged her to sleep, but she couldn't make herself put the book down. Finally, as the wind began to ease outside, she opened it and began to read. The entries spanned years, starting from when Catherine was a child. Her father had recorded not just events, but his thoughts and worries, his hopes for her future, his concerns about the political landscape she would inherit. As she read deeper, she found passages that made her breath catch. Catherine asked me today why she couldn't train with the knights like the boys do. I told her ladies learn different skills, but I wonder if I'm wrong. She has the kind of mind that sees problems and finds solutions. She'll need that strength more than sword skills if she's to survive what's coming. And later, the marriage contract with Edmund Blackwood is signed. I've done everything I can to ensure Catherine's rights are protected, but I see ambition in that young man's eyes. I hope I'm wrong. I hope he'll prove worthy of my daughter. But if he doesn't, she must know she has the strength to stand without him. The final entry was dated 3 days before her father's death. I'm not foolish enough to believe I have much time left. The cough grows worse each day. I've made arrangements, secured documents, prepared for contingencies. If Edmund proves false, others will come to Catherine's aid. I've made certain of it. My greatest fear is that she won't believe in herself as I believe in her. Catherine, if you're reading this, know that you carry within you everything necessary to rule. Not because I say so, but because I've watched you grow into a woman of wisdom, compassion, and strength. Crown or no crown, you are a queen. Catherine closed the journal as dawn began to break, the words echoing in her mind. She thought of Margaret teaching her about childbirth, of Elizabeth showing her how to plant seeds, of Anne bringing news from the village. She thought of William's loyalty, of Sarah's unwavering support, of Beatrice risking Edmund's wrath to bring her the truth. She placed her hands on her belly, feeling the child move. Your grandfather believed in me, she whispered. Perhaps it's time I start believing in myself. The rest of winter passed in a strange state of suspension. Catherine continued her daily routines, cooking, cleaning, preparing for the baby's arrival. But her mind was increasingly elsewhere. She read and reread her father's journal, finding new meaning in each passage. She studied the legal documents Beatrice had left, understanding for the first time the careful web of protections her father had woven around her inheritance. Margaret helped her prepare the cottage for the baby's arrival. They set up a small cradle that the carpenter had made, a gift, he'd insisted, though Catherine suspected Margaret had orchestrated it. Cloths for swaddling appeared from various village women, along with advice, old wives' tales, and warnings about everything from full moons to cold drafts. First babies take their time, Margaret said one afternoon as she helped Catherine fold the cloths. You'll know when it's starting. Don't panic. Send Thomas or William for me immediately. Elizabeth will come too. She's got steady hands, good for a birth. I'm frightened, Catherine admitted. Not just of the birth, but of what comes after. How do I raise a child in these circumstances? The same way every mother does, Margaret replied practically. One day at a time, with love and patience and help from those around you. Your child won't care about castles or crowns. They'll care about full bellies, warm blankets, and a mother who loves them. The rest, well, that's for later worry. In early March, as winter began its reluctant retreat, Catherine's pains began. It started as a dull ache in her lower back, nothing concerning. But by evening, the contractions had intensified, and Sarah sent William writing for Margaret. The next 12 hours were both the longest and shortest of Catherine's life. Margaret arrived with Elizabeth and another woman, Judith, who'd birthed 9 children of her own. They took over the cottage with calm efficiency, heating water, preparing clean cloths, talking Catherine through each contraction. breathe.
"My lady," Margaret instructed, her voice steady. "In through your nose, out through your mouth. That's it. You're doing well." "This is impossible," Catherine gasped between pains. "I can't." "You can, and you will," Judith said firmly. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. Your body knows what to do. Trust it."
As dawn broke, nearly 24 hours after the pains began, Catherine felt an overwhelming urge to push. Margaret checked her progress and nodded. "It's time. With the next pain, you push as hard as you can." What followed was primal and exhausting and utterly consuming. Catherine lost track of time, of everything except the need to push, to breathe, to endure. She heard herself making sounds she'd never made before, felt her body doing things she'd never imagined. And then, impossibly, there was a cry. Not her own, higher, thinner, indignant. "A girl!" Margaret announced, her voice bright with triumph. "A beautiful, healthy girl." Catherine collapsed back against the pillows as Margaret placed the baby on her chest. The child was red-faced, angry, perfect. She had a shock of dark hair and eyes that, though unfocused, were already alert and searching. "Hello," Catherine whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Hello, little one. I'm your mother." Sarah was crying openly, as was Elizabeth. Even practical Judith had suspiciously bright eyes as she helped clean the baby. Margaret waited until mother and daughter had their first moment together, then gently took the baby to swaddle her properly. "She's strong," Margaret said approvingly. "Good lungs, good color. She'll be a fighter, this one." "She'll have to be," Catherine murmured, exhausted but unable to look away from her daughter. "I'll name her Alara, after my grandmother." "A good name," Sarah said softly. "Your father would be proud." Over the following weeks, Catherine discovered that nothing she'd experienced before had prepared her for motherhood. Alara was demanding, keeping her awake through the nights, requiring constant feeding and attention. But she was also miraculous. Catherine found herself studying the baby's tiny fingers, marveling at how perfect her ears were, how her eyes were beginning to focus and follow movement. The village women continued their support, bringing food, taking turns so Catherine could sleep, offering advice and encouragement. William stood guard over the cottage more vigilantly than ever, and Thomas made extra trips to the village to ensure they had everything needed. One evening in late March, as Catherine sat by the fire nursing Alara, William knocked and entered with unusual urgency in his manner. "My lady, I have news from Ashford. It's complicated." Catherine gestured for him to sit. "Tell me." "Lord Edmund's alliance is collapsing. The Eastern lords Margot promised have withdrawn their support. Apparently, her father misrepresented his influence. The coastal territories never formally agreed to the marriage terms. Without their backing, Edmund is vulnerable. There's talk of challenging his claim to the Ashford lands." "Good," Catherine said flatly. "Let him face consequences for once." "There's more." William hesitated. "Lady Margot isn't pregnant. There were expectations that she'd provide an heir quickly. But 4 months into the marriage, there's no sign of conception. Meanwhile, word has spread about your daughter. About Alara." Catherine's arms tightened protectively around the baby. "What word?" "That she's healthy and strong. That she's King Harold's granddaughter, regardless of Edmund's rejection. Some of the old council members are saying privately that the bloodline continues through her. Not through any child Edmund might eventually have with Margot." "That's dangerous talk," Catherine said quietly. "It's truthful talk," William corrected. "My lady, things are shifting at Ashford. Edmund's authority is questioned daily. The spring planting has been poorly organized. 3 merchant families have relocated to other territories because of unfair taxes. The Archbishop has formally noted his disapproval of how your exile was handled." Catherine looked down at Ilara, who'd fallen asleep nursing, her small mouth still moving in dream-feeding motions. What does any of this matter? I'm here, Edmund is there, and the world continues. It matters because people are beginning to realize that rightful succession matters, William said intensely. Your father built something worth preserving. Edmund is dismantling it through incompetence and greed. Sooner or later, there will be a reckoning. That night, after William left and everyone else had gone to bed, Catherine sat holding her sleeping daughter and thinking. She thought about her father's journal, about Beatrice's documents, about everything that had happened since that terrible day in the Great Hall. She'd been cast out, yes. Abandoned by her husband, stripped of her title, exiled to a cottage on the edge of nowhere. But she hadn't been destroyed. Instead, she'd found something else, a different kind of strength, built not on power or position but on community and character. Looking at Ilara's peaceful face, Catherine made a decision. She would raise her daughter to know her grandfather's values. She would teach her that true leadership came from service, not dominance. And when the time came, if it came, she would be ready to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. But not yet. For now, her world consisted of this cottage, this child, and these people who'd chosen to stand with her. That was enough. Spring advanced, bringing warmer weather and new growth. Catherine worked in the small garden Elizabeth had helped her plant, Ilara sleeping nearby in a basket. She found peace in the simple rhythm of planting and watering, of watching seeds transform into seedlings. The village accepted Ilara as one of their own. Women stopped by to admire her, to offer hand-me-down clothes and carved toys. Children peered into her basket with curiosity, asking endless questions about babies. Catherine had feared judgment, an unmarried mother, essentially, though she was legally still Edmund's wife, but instead found acceptance. We judge actions, not circumstances, the village priest told her one Sunday after service. You've been faithful in your attendance, kind to your neighbors, and hardworking despite your difficulties. That's what matters to us. In May, Beatrice returned, this time during daylight, and with less drama. She brought more news from Ashford, none of it good for Edmund. His disputes with the Eastern Lords had escalated into threats of military action. Margot had grown imperious and demanding, alienating the castle staff and local gentry. 3 of Harold's former council members had resigned in protest over various policies. He's making enemies faster than he can count them, Beatrice reported, sitting at Catherine's table while Ilara gurgled happily in her basket. There's serious discussion among the remaining council about whether he's fit to rule. Can they remove him? Catherine asked, though she kept her tone neutral. Legally, it's complicated. Your father's will is clear, but Edmund has possession and that counts for much. However, Beatrice paused significantly. There's a clause in the marriage contract that neither you nor Edmund may have noticed. If either party commits gross misconduct, which includes unlawful exile or abandonment, the other party can petition for dissolution and restoration of rights. Catherine stared at her. Are you suggesting I challenge Edmund legally? I'm suggesting that you have options, Beatrice said carefully. Not now, certainly. You have a newborn to care for. But someday, when Ilara is older and you're ready, the legal framework exists to reclaim your inheritance. And if I don't want it, Catherine heard herself say, if I decide this life, simple as it is better than the political machinations of court? Beatrice looked at her with something like surprise. That would be your choice, of course. But consider this. Edmund is destroying everything your father built. The people of Ashford suffer under his mismanagement. If you don't act, his damage will be your father's legacy. Can you live with that? After Beatrice left, Catherine wrestled with the question. She looked around her small cottage, humble but clean, warm, filled with evidence of community and care. She looked at Alara, growing stronger each day, already showing signs of her grandfather's steady gaze and her mother's determination. Could she raise her daughter here, in obscurity and simplicity? Yes. Would it be easier, safer, less complicated? Absolutely. But would it be right? That evening, she opened her father's journal again, rereading passages she'd nearly memorized. Leadership is not about wanting power. It's about accepting responsibility when others cannot or will not. The burden of a crown is choosing to serve when service is hard. Summer brought heat and growth. Catherine's garden flourished, providing vegetables that she shared with the village families who'd shared so much with her. Alara grew rapidly, her eyes brightening, her awareness expanding. She recognized her mother's face now, smiled at familiar voices, reached for objects with increasing coordination. Catherine taught Anne and 2 other village girls to read, holding lessons in the cottage's main room while Alara played nearby. She mended clothes for families who couldn't afford the tailor, learning the skill from Sarah's patient instruction. She helped Margaret with difficult births, holding frightened mothers' hands and remembering her own fear and pain. She realized one evening, happy. Not in the way she'd been happy before. That had been a shallow happiness based on comfort and status. This was deeper, rooted in purpose and connection. But it was also a happiness shadowed by the knowledge that it couldn't last forever. In August, William returned from Ashford with grave news. Lord Edmund has attempted to arrest several former council members on false charges of sedition. The Archbishop has intervened, threatening excommunication if Edmund continues. There are rumors of families planning to leave Ashford territory entirely. And he hesitated, and Catherine knew what he was about to say. Edmund is claiming my daughter isn't his, she finished quietly. William nodded. He's telling anyone who'll listen that the child must be from an affair, that he had grounds for the exile. It's despicable, but it's gaining some traction among those who benefit from supporting him. Catherine felt anger rise in her chest, not for herself, but for Alara. He would deny his own daughter to preserve his position. He would, and he is, William confirmed. But others are pushing back. Several witnesses have come forward to testify that the marriage was intact until your father's death, that there was never any question of infidelity. The Archbishop himself has written a letter affirming the timeline makes Edmund's claim impossible. So my daughter is caught in political games before she's even 6 months old, Catherine said bitterly. Your daughter is the rightful heir to Ashford, William said firmly, and that matters to more people than you realize. That night, as Catherine lay awake listening to Alara's soft breathing, she made a decision. She would go to Ashford. Not to reclaim her position, not yet, but to confront Edmund directly, to demand he acknowledge his daughter, to stop him from destroying her father's legacy entirely. It took 2 weeks to make arrangements. Margaret agreed to care for Alara during Catherine's absence. She wouldn't risk her daughter in whatever confrontation lay ahead. Sarah insisted on accompanying her, as did William. Beatrice, when summoned, brought the legal documents and a grim smile. It's about time, she said simply. They traveled in early September, when the roads were dry and travel easiest. Catherine wore one of her old gowns. It hung loose now after pregnancy and months of simple living, but it was still fine enough to command respect. Her hair, which had grown long, Sarah braided elaborately. She looked. She realized catching her reflection in a stream, like a woman who'd survived something hard and come out stronger. Ashford Castle appeared over the ridge like a memory. Catherine felt her breath catch. So much had happened here. So much joy and pain. The walls looked the same, but she knew she'd changed fundamentally. The guards at the gate recognized her despite her altered appearance. They exchanged uncertain glances, unsure what to do. Finally, the older one said, Lady Catherine, the Lord isn't expecting you. I'm certain he's not, Catherine replied calmly. Nevertheless, tell him I'm here. I'll wait in the courtyard. News of her arrival spread through the castle like wildfire. By the time Edmund emerged from the great hall, a crowd had gathered. Servants, guards, visiting merchants, local gentry. Everyone wanted to see this confrontation. Edmund looked older than Catherine remembered. He'd gained weight, his face showed stress lines, and his eyes held a hardness that hadn't been there before. Margot appeared beside him, beautiful and cold in an elaborate gown that must have cost more than Catherine's cottage was worth. Catherine, Edmund's voice was carefully controlled. This is unexpected. I'm certain it is, Catherine replied, stepping forward. She'd rehearsed this moment in her mind 100 times, but now that it was here, she felt strangely calm. I've come to discuss our daughter. You mean the child you claim is mine? Edmund said loudly, playing to the crowd. The child born 7 months after our separation? Simple mathematics raises questions, wouldn't you say? Catherine pulled a document from her cloak, a letter from the castle's own physician, obtained by Beatrice through careful inquiry. Dr. Whitmore's notes confirm I was pregnant when you exiled me. He examined me the day before you made your announcement, though you never asked him. The child was conceived in December, born in March, a perfectly normal timeline. Edmund's face darkened. Whitmore is mistaken. Whitmore is honest, Catherine countered. Unlike some. She looked around at the gathered crowd. I didn't come here to reclaim my position. I came to tell you all the truth about what happened. My father, King Harold, made me his heir through legal documentation that Edmund has hidden. He exiled me not because I was unfaithful or unfit, but because I was no longer politically useful to him. And now he denies his own daughter to avoid the complications her existence creates. You dare come here and accuse me? Edmund's voice rose. After you abandoned your duties, failed in your obligations. I abandoned nothing, Catherine said, her voice cutting through his bluster. You cast me out when I was carrying your child because Margot Sinclair offered you more land. You prioritized wealth over family, power over principle. And now you're destroying everything my father built because you lack the wisdom and character to maintain it. The crowd murmured. Catherine saw nods, heard whispers of agreement. This was the moment Beatrice had prepared her for. Not a legal challenge, but a moral one. Let the people see who Edmund truly was. Margot stepped forward, her voice icy. You're a bitter woman who can't accept that her time has passed. Edmund made a strategic decision for the good of these lands. Strategic? Catherine laughed, the sound harsh. Your promised alliances have collapsed. Your father's influence was fiction. The Eastern Lords want nothing to do with Ashford now, and the territory is suffering because of it. My father spent 40 years building prosperity and peace. Edmund has undone most of it in less than a year. She turned to address the crowd directly. I'm not here to start a war or claim a throne. I'm here because I want you to know the truth. I want you to know that my daughter, Ilara, is the legitimate heir to Ashford. Whether she ever claims that inheritance is her choice to make when she's grown. But she deserves to have that choice, free from the lies her father tells to make himself comfortable. Edmund moved toward her, anger contorting his features. You have no right. William stepped between them, hand on his sword. That's close enough, my lord. The tension in the courtyard was electric. Catherine could see it playing out. One word from Edmund, and this could turn violent. But she also saw the faces around them, saw the calculation in the eyes of the lords and ladies present. Edmund's authority was already questionable. Starting a physical confrontation with his cast-off pregnant wife would only damage it further. Edmund seemed to reach the same conclusion. He stepped back, forcing his face into a mask of control. You've said your piece. Now leave before I have you arrested for trespassing. I'll leave, Catherine agreed. But first, one more thing. She pulled out the final document Beatrice had prepared, a formal declaration witnessed by the Archbishop and several nobles. "This is my statement of claim on behalf of my daughter. It doesn't challenge your current rule, Edmund, but it establishes her legal right to inheritance should anything happen to you, or should you die without legitimate issue. It's been filed with the church, the regional magistrate, and the Crown's records. You can't make it disappear." She handed the document to one of the watching nobles, Lord Pemberton, one of her father's oldest friends. He took it gravely, nodding to her. "Lady Catherine," he said quietly, "your father would be proud of your courage." Catherine felt tears threaten, but blinked them back. She'd promised herself she wouldn't cry, wouldn't show weakness. She turned to go, then paused and looked back at Edmund one last time. "I loved you once," she said softly. "I thought we'd build a life together, raise children, grow old in partnership. You destroyed that for political gain. I hope your ambition keeps you warm at night, Edmund, because nothing else will." The journey back to the cottage felt longer than the journey out. Catherine was exhausted, emotionally and physically drained. But she also felt lighter, as if she'd released a burden she'd been carrying for months. "You did well," Beatrice said as they rode. "You didn't demand what couldn't be given, but you established truth. That matters." "Will it make a difference?" Catherine asked. "Eventually," Beatrice replied. "Change rarely happens all at once. It's a series of small shifts, moments when people see clearly and adjust their thinking. You planted seeds today. They'll grow." When they arrived at the cottage, Margaret was waiting with Alara. Catherine swept her daughter into her arms, breathing in her familiar scent, feeling the weight of her solid little body. "Mama missed you," she whispered. "So much." Alara, who'd been learning to babble, made a happy sound and grabbed a fistful of Catherine's hair. The simple, ordinary gesture nearly broke Catherine's control. This was real. This child. This love. This life they were building. Everything else was just politics and games. Over the following months, life settled back into its rhythms. Catherine taught her reading students, tended her garden, cared for Alara, and helped her village neighbors. Word of her confrontation with Edmund spread through the territory, bringing both support and controversy. Some nobles began sending discreet messages of approval through William. Others condemned her for challenging her husband's authority. The common people, however, seemed overwhelmingly on her side. Stories spread of her kindness during exile, her willingness to work alongside villagers, her dedication to her daughter. By winter, Alara was walking, tottering steps that grew more confident daily. She had her father's dark hair, but her mother's green eyes, and her grandmother's stubborn determination. Catherine watched her daughter explore their small cottage with endless curiosity and felt hope for the future. On the anniversary of her father's death, Catherine made the journey to his tomb. It was located in the old church near Ashford, and she half expected Edmund to forbid her entry. But he didn't. Perhaps even he recognized there were lines that shouldn't be crossed. She knelt before the stone monument, Alara in her arms, and spoke quietly. "I miss you, Father. Every day, I wish I could ask your advice, hear your wisdom. But I think I understand now what you were trying to teach me. That true strength isn't about power, it's about character. That leading isn't about commanding, it's about serving. That a crown doesn't make a queen, choices do." Alara reached out and patted the cold stone, making a questioning sound. "That's your grandfather," Catherine told her daughter. "King Harold. He was wise and kind, and he loved us both, even though he never got to meet you. Someday, when you're older, I'll tell you all about him, and you'll decide for yourself what kind of person you want to be." As winter deepened again, Catherine realized a full year had passed since her exile. So much had changed. Everything had changed, and yet she felt more herself now than she ever had in the castle. She'd discovered strength she didn't know she possessed, found community in unexpected places, learned that worth wasn't determined by title or position. One snowy evening, as she sat by the fire with Alara asleep on her shoulder, there was a knock at the door. William entered, stomping snow from his boots, his expression urgent. "Lady Catherine, news from Ashford. Edmund is gravely ill. The physicians believe it's the same lung fever that took your father." Catherine felt her heart constrict, not with love for Edmund, but with the weight of what this might mean. "How long?" "Days, perhaps a week at most. He's asking for you." "Why?" "I don't know, but my lady—" William hesitated. "This changes everything. If Edmund dies without acknowledging Alara, the succession becomes complicated. But if he does acknowledge her—" Catherine looked down at her sleeping daughter. Alara had no awareness of the politics swirling around her existence, no understanding that her father lay dying just miles away. She was simply a baby, innocent and pure, deserving better than the mess adults had made of her world. "I'll go," Catherine said quietly. "Not for Edmund. For Alara. She deserves to know I tried." The castle was somber when Catherine arrived the next morning. Servants moved quietly through the halls, and the atmosphere felt heavy with anticipation. Edmund had been lord for just over a year, but already people were speculating about what would come next. Margot intercepted Catherine in the corridor outside Edmund's chambers. She looked haggard, her usual composed beauty marred by stress and sleepless nights. "He shouldn't see you," Margot said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. "He asked for me," Catherine replied calmly. "And regardless of everything that's happened, he's still legally my husband and Alara's father. I won't deny him final words, even if he denied us everything else." Margot stepped aside, and Catherine entered the sick room. Edmund lay in the great bed, propped up on pillows, his breathing labored. The physician stood nearby, his expression grim. When Edmund saw Catherine, something flickered in his eyes. Regret, perhaps, or simply recognition of his own mortality. "Catherine." His voice was weak, barely above a whisper. "You came. You asked." She moved to stand beside the bed but didn't touch him. "What do you want, Edmund?" "To apologize." He coughed, a rattling sound that shook his whole frame. "I was wrong. About everything. I thought power and land were what mattered. But lying here, dying, I realized they're just empty." "That's quite a realization to have now," Catherine said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "I know. Too late for us." He reached toward her with one trembling hand. "But not too late for Alara. She is mine, isn't she? My daughter." "Yes," Catherine said simply. "She has your dark hair and your stubbornness." A ghost of a smile crossed Edmund's face. "Like you have your father's wisdom, which I was too blind to value." He gestured to the physician. "Bring the papers." The physician produced documents. Catherine recognized them as formal acknowledgement of paternity and inheritance. Edmund signed them with a shaking hand, then looked up at her. "I can't undo what I've done. I can't give you back the year I stole from you. But I can give Alara what's rightfully hers. My estate, my holdings, they'll pass to her when she comes of age. Until then." He coughed again, harder. "Until then, you'll serve as regent. Margot gets her dowry lands back. The marriage contract specifies that. But Ashford itself, your father's kingdom, goes to his granddaughter as it should have from the beginning." Catherine stared at the documents, at Edmund's scrawled signature. "Why now? Why not months ago when it could have mattered?" "Because I was a fool," Edmund said simply. "And dying has a way of clarifying what truly matters." I loved you once, Catherine, before ambition poisoned it. That love is probably the only good thing I'll be remembered for." He died 3 days later. The funeral was well attended but subdued. People came more from obligation than grief. Margot left immediately after, taking her belongings and returning to her father's lands. The castle staff looked to Catherine with uncertain hope, wondering what came next. Catherine stood in the great hall where, just over a year ago, Edmund had announced her exile. Now she held Alara, older, steadier, more aware, and looked out at the assembled people. "I didn't ask for this responsibility," she began, her voice carrying in the stone space. "A year ago, I was cast out from this place with nothing but the child growing inside me. I learned to live with less, to find strength in community, to understand that true worth doesn't come from titles or crowns." She paused, looking around at the familiar faces, some supportive, some skeptical, all watching carefully. "My father ruled these lands with wisdom and fairness for 40 years. I'll honor his legacy by doing the same, not because of any crown or title, but because these people, all of you, deserve leadership that serves rather than exploits, that builds rather than destroys, that values character over ambition." She shifted Alara to her other hip. "This is Lady Alara, daughter of Edmund Blackwood and granddaughter of King Harold. She's the rightful heir to these lands. Until she comes of age, I'll serve as regent, not as a power to be claimed, but as a duty to be fulfilled. And I'll do it with the same values my father taught me: fairness, compassion, and service." Lord Pemberton stepped forward. "Lady Catherine, the council would be honored to support your regency. Your father chose well when he named you his heir. The events of the past year have only proven his wisdom." Others added their voices in agreement. Not everyone. Some nobles were too invested in Edmund's alliances to change course immediately. But enough that Catherine knew she could govern, could rebuild what had been damaged. The first months of her regency were challenging. She had to learn quickly, relying heavily on Beatrice and the other former council members who'd served her father. She made mistakes, faced opposition, dealt with problems that had no easy solutions, but she also brought changes. She reduced the taxes Edmund had imposed, restored fairness to merchant contracts, and reinstated the council's authority and governance. She lived simply despite her restored position, keeping the cottage on the eastern border as a retreat and reminder of where she'd been. The village families who'd supported her during exile found themselves honored in the new order. Margaret became an official midwife for the castle. Elizabeth's father received a contract for his cobbling that secured his family's future. Anne came to live at the castle as Alara's companion and Catherine's assistant. As spring returned, 2 years after her father's death, Catherine walked through the castle gardens with Alara toddling beside her. The child was chattering in her developing language about flowers and butterflies, oblivious to the weight of inheritance resting on her small shoulders. Beatrice found them there, documents in hand as always. "The Eastern lords are requesting a meeting to formalize relations. They want to apologize for their role in Edmund's schemes." "Let them apologize," Catherine said calmly. "And then let's build something better than what came before." She picked up Alara, who'd discovered a ladybug and was trying to catch it. "Your grandfather built a kingdom on principles, not just power. Edmund tried to hold it through force and ambition. I'll show them there's a better way. Governance through service, leadership through character, strength through community." "You already are," Beatrice said quietly. "The people see it. They're starting to understand that what happened to you, the exile, the hardship, made you a better leader than you would have been otherwise." Catherine thought about that as she carried Alara back toward the castle. She thought about the cottage, about Margaret's lessons in childbirth, about learning to garden and cook and survive. She thought about the nights spent wondering if she'd ever find her way again. "Maybe," she said finally. "Or maybe I was always this person, and I just needed circumstances to strip away everything superficial, so I could see it clearly. Years passed, and Ashford flourished under Catherine's regency. She ruled with the wisdom her father had instilled in her, combining compassion with practicality. The territory's prosperity returned as fair governance replaced Edmund's exploitation. Trade routes reopened, families that had left returned, and the castle became known once again as a place of justice rather than ambition. Alara grew into a bright, curious child who spent her mornings learning letters and numbers from tutors, and her afternoons playing with the children of both nobles and commoners. Catherine insisted her daughter understand all levels of society. She took her to the village markets, to the farms during harvest, to the workshops where craftsmen labored. "Why do I need to know how bread is made?" Alara asked one day when she was 6, watching the baker knead dough in the castle kitchens. "Because someday you'll lead people who make bread," Catherine replied, "and a good leader understands the lives of those they serve. Your grandfather taught me that, and now I'm teaching you." The child considered this seriously. She had that quality already, the ability to think deeply about complex ideas. "Did grandfather teach you everything you know?" "Much of it, but I learned other things from harder teachers, from loss, from exile, from having to survive when everything seemed impossible. Those lessons were just as valuable." When Alara was 8, Catherine gathered the council to make an announcement. "I believe it's time to formally establish the succession laws for Ashford. No more ambiguity, no more room for opportunists to exploit unclear inheritance rules. Women will have equal rights to inherit, and character requirements will be specified for any who would rule these lands." Lord Pemberton nodded approvingly. King Harold would have wanted this. He knew times were changing, that old ways needed to adapt. The laws were written carefully, with input from nobles, clergy, merchants, and even representatives from the common villages. They specified not just bloodline requirements but expectations for governance, fairness in taxation, accountability in decisions, respect for established rights and customs. "These laws won't prevent all problems," Catherine told the assembled council when the documents were finalized, "but they'll make it harder for someone like Edmund to seize power through manipulation and lies." As Alara approached her 10th birthday, Catherine began involving her more directly in governance. The girl sat in on council meetings, learning to listen carefully and ask thoughtful questions. She accompanied her mother on visits to villages, seeing firsthand how policies affected real people. "Some of the nobles don't like me being here," Alara observed after one particularly contentious meeting about trade tariffs. "I heard Lord Ashton say I'm too young to understand." "You probably are too young to understand everything," Catherine agreed. "But you're not too young to start learning. And the nobles who complain are usually the ones who prefer confusion, because it lets them manipulate situations to their advantage. Your presence makes things more transparent, which they find uncomfortable." "Is that why you were exiled? Because you made father uncomfortable?" It was the first time Alara had asked directly about Edmund. Catherine had told her the basic facts, that her father had made a mistake, that he'd eventually tried to make amends before his death, but had avoided the painful details. "Your father wanted power more than he wanted truth," Catherine said carefully. "When I became inconvenient to his ambitions, he removed me. It was wrong, and it hurt terribly. But it also taught me who I truly was, and what really mattered." "Do you hate him?" Catherine considered the question honestly. "No. I did once, but hate is exhausting and ultimately pointless. I pity him, perhaps. He traded away real love and family for political gains that crumbled almost immediately. He died with regrets he could never fix. That's punishment enough." Alara was quiet for a moment, then said, "I'm glad he acknowledged me before he died. Even if he did wrong things, at least he tried to fix that one." "Yes," Catherine agreed softly. "Even flawed people can sometimes do the right thing in the end." By the time Alara turned 12, she was actively participating in governance. She had a natural gift for diplomacy, able to find compromises that satisfied multiple parties. She also had her grandfather's sense of justice. She became visibly upset when she learned about unfair situations and immediately wanted to fix them. "There's a family in the southern village whose farm was damaged by the spring floods," Alara reported to her mother one evening. "They're behind on their taxes because they lost most of their crop. Lord Ashton wants to seize their land, but that's wrong. They just need time to recover." "What do you think should be done?" Catherine asked, letting her daughter work through the problem. "Defer their taxes until next harvest. Send supplies from the castle stores to help them get through the year. Maybe have the Masons Guild repair their damaged barn as a community project. It would be good training for the apprentices." Catherine smiled. "Those are exactly the solutions your grandfather would have suggested. Present them to the council tomorrow. You're old enough to advocate for your own proposals now." The years continued their steady march. Alara grew into a thoughtful young woman who balanced her royal responsibilities with genuine compassion for her people. She never forgot the stories her mother told about the cottage on the eastern border, about the village women who'd helped during the hardest times, about learning that worth came from character rather than title. When Alara was 15, she asked to spend a month living in the cottage, experiencing the life her mother had lived during exile. "Why would you want to do that?" Catherine asked, though part of her understood. "Because it made you who you are," Alara replied simply. "And if I'm going to rule these lands someday, I need to understand all aspects of how people live, not just the comfortable parts." Catherine arranged it with some trepidation. Alara went to the cottage with only Sarah, now quite elderly but still sharp, and lived as Catherine had lived. She cooked simple meals, carried water, helped with village work, attended the small church, and learned from Margaret, now a grandmother several times over, about the lives of common families. When Alara returned to the castle a month later, she seemed different. More grounded, more aware of her privilege and responsibility. "I understand now," she told her mother. "Why you never forgot where you came from, even after you returned here. Why you insist we live more simply than most noble families. Why you care so much about fair taxation and helping people during hard times. You remember what it was like to struggle. And you'll remember, too," Catherine said. "That's the real value of inheritance. Not land or gold, but wisdom passed from one generation to the next." As Alara's 16th birthday approached, preparations began for a formal ceremony recognizing her as heir apparent. It would be a significant event, with nobles from throughout the region attending, formally accepting her future rule. The night before the ceremony, Catherine found Alara standing in the Great Hall, looking at the portrait of King Harold that hung there. "Nervous?" Catherine asked, coming to stand beside her daughter. "Terrified," Alara admitted. "What if I'm not wise enough? What if I make mistakes like Father did?" "You will make mistakes," Catherine said gently. "Every leader does. The question isn't whether you'll be perfect. It's whether you'll learn from your errors and keep trying to do better. Your grandfather made mistakes too, but he never stopped caring about his people's welfare, and he never let ambition override his principles. That's what made him great. And you?" Alara looked at her mother. "What made you great?" Catherine laughed. "I'm not great. I'm just someone who survived difficult circumstances and tried to turn them into wisdom. If I've succeeded at anything, it's in teaching you that true strength comes from service, not domination." The next day, the great hall filled with nobles, clergy, merchants, and representatives from villages throughout Ashford's territory. Alara stood before them in a simple but elegant gown, her dark hair braided in a crown around her head, looking remarkably like her grandfather in his youth. The archbishop conducted the ceremony, blessing Alara and formally recognizing her as Catherine's heir. Then Catherine herself stepped forward to speak. 16 years ago, my father died and left me a kingdom I wasn't ready to inherit. Circumstances took me away from these halls, stripped me of comfort and position, and forced me to discover who I truly was beneath the title. When I returned, not because I sought power, but because duty demanded it, I brought with me the lessons learned in exile. She looked at her daughter with pride. Ilara has been raised with those lessons from the beginning. She understands that a crown is a burden of service, not a prize to be claimed. She knows that the welfare of the humblest farmer matters as much as the concerns of the highest noble. She's learned that justice requires both compassion and strength, wisdom and courage. Catherine placed her hands on Ilara's shoulders. I present to you Lady Ilara of Ashford, granddaughter of King Harold, rightful heir to these lands. She will rule someday not because of bloodline alone, but because she's been prepared through teaching, experience, and character development to lead with wisdom and fairness. The assembled crowd erupted in applause. Not everyone supported Catherine's regency or Ilara's succession. There were still those who favored traditional male-only inheritance, but the majority recognized what Catherine had accomplished and trusted that Ilara would continue her work. After the ceremony, during the feast, Lord Pemberton approached Catherine with a thoughtful expression. Your father would be incredibly proud, he said, not just of what you've accomplished, but of how you've accomplished it. He always believed that adversity could either destroy a person or forge them into something stronger. You proved him right. I had good teachers, Catherine replied, and good friends who stood by me when they had every reason not to. That makes all the difference. The following years were peaceful and prosperous. Ilara continued her education in governance, while Catherine gradually transferred more responsibilities to her daughter. By the time Ilara turned 18, she was handling most daily administrative duties, while Catherine focused on larger strategic planning and diplomatic relations with neighboring territories. Margaret, now quite elderly, passed away peacefully in her sleep one winter night. Catherine attended the funeral in the small village church, grieving the woman who'd helped bring Ilara into the world and taught her so much about strength and kindness. She was just a miller's wife, one of the attending nobles murmured, seeming surprised at Catherine's visible grief. She was a woman who showed compassion when she could have turned away, Catherine replied firmly. She helped me survive the worst period of my life. That makes her nobility worth more than any title. When Ilara turned 20, Catherine made an announcement that surprised the entire court. She was stepping back from active governance. I've served as regent for 11 years, she told the assembled council. Ilara is fully capable of ruling now. She doesn't need my shadow hanging over her. It's time for her to lead in her own right. But you're still young yourself, Lord Pemberton protested. You have years of wisdom to share. And I'll share it when asked, Catherine agreed. But as an advisor, not as a ruler. Ilara needs the freedom to make her own decisions, even her own mistakes, without constantly wondering what I would do differently. The transition was smoother than expected. Ilara had been so thoroughly prepared that she stepped into full authority with confidence. Her first major decision was to establish a formal system of representatives from each village, giving common people direct input into governance, something even her grandfather hadn't fully implemented. Catherine watched her daughter's coronation with tears of joy and pride. Ilara looked radiant in her crown, not the elaborate, jeweled monstrosity that many monarchs favored, but a simple circlet of gold that King Harold had worn, restored from storage where Edmund had hidden it. By the authority granted to me, and with the blessing of these people, the archbishop intoned, I declare Lady Ilara of Ashford to be queen of these lands, protector of the realm, servant of justice and mercy. The crowd erupted in genuine celebration. Ilara had earned their respect through years of demonstrating wisdom beyond her age, compassion for all people regardless of station, and dedication to fair governance. This wasn't a coronation born of bloodline alone. It was recognition that she'd proven herself worthy of leadership. At the feast afterward, Ilara found Catherine standing on a balcony overlooking the castle grounds. Why out here? Ilara asked. You should be celebrating inside. I am celebrating, Catherine replied, just quietly. I'm thinking about your grandfather, about everything that's happened since his death. If someone had told me then, when Edmund was exiling me, that his daughter would someday rule these lands, I wouldn't have believed it possible. But here we are, Elara said softly. Because you never gave up. Because you found strength in impossible circumstances. Because you taught me that true leadership means serving others, not yourself. Catherine pulled her daughter into an embrace. You'll be a better queen than I ever could have been, because you weren't raised to rule, you were raised to serve. That makes all the difference. I learned it from you, Elara whispered, and from your grandfather through me. That's how legacy works. Wisdom passed down, refined by each generation's experiences, growing stronger rather than weaker with time. The years that followed proved Elara to be as capable as Catherine had believed. She ruled with fairness and innovation, implementing reforms that benefited all levels of society. She maintained her mother's emphasis on knowing her people personally, regularly visiting villages and meeting with citizens to understand their concerns. Catherine settled into a quieter life, though she remained active as an advisor when Elara requested it. She spent much of her time at the cottage on the eastern border, where she'd once lived in exile. She'd expanded it into a small retreat where she could escape court politics and remember the lessons learned during her hardest times. On the 20th anniversary of her exile, Catherine made a pilgrimage to her father's tomb. She was in her 40s now, hair showing streaks of gray, face lined with experience, but she felt more at peace than she ever had as a young woman. I hope I've honored your legacy, Father, she said quietly, kneeling before the stone monument. I didn't follow the path you probably envisioned for me, but I tried to hold to the principles you taught. That true nobility comes from character, that leadership means service, that wisdom is more valuable than power. She thought about everything that had led to this moment. Her father's death, Edmund's betrayal, the exile, Elara's birth, the struggle to survive, the unexpected return, the years of rebuilding, and finally, seeing her daughter crowned as a wise and compassionate queen. Loss and hardship nearly destroyed me, she continued. But they also forged me into someone stronger than I would have been otherwise. I hope that's worth something. I hope the kingdom is better because of the path I walked, even though I wouldn't have chosen it. As she stood to leave, she noticed a young woman approaching with a small child, one of the village families that had supported her during exile. The woman stopped, recognizing Catherine, and made a small curtsy. Lady Catherine, she said, I hope I'm not intruding. I just wanted to say thank you. My grandmother was Margaret, the miller's wife. She spoke of you often before she passed. She said you taught her that nobility wasn't about birth. It was about choices. That lesson changed how our family thinks about ourselves and our place in the world. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. Your grandmother taught me far more than I ever taught her. She showed me how to survive when everything seemed impossible. She would say you showed her that everyone deserves kindness and respect, regardless of station, the young woman replied. That's something we've passed down to our children. This little one, she touched her daughter's head gently, is named Margaret Catherine in honor of both of you. After they left, Catherine remained by her father's tomb a while longer, thinking about legacy and how it ripples through generations. She'd lost so much: her husband, her position, years of peace and security. But she'd gained something more valuable: wisdom, character, and the knowledge that she'd made a genuine difference in people's lives. As she walked back toward the castle, she saw Elara in the distance, meeting with a group of farmers to discuss irrigation projects. Her daughter moved among them with easy confidence, listening more than speaking, taking notes, asking thoughtful questions. She was everything a queen should be, not because of her crown, but because of her character. Catherine smiled. This was her true legacy: not land or titles, but a daughter who understood that leadership meant service, that power was a tool for helping others, that true nobility came from within. Everything she'd endured, all the pain and struggle and hardship, had led to this moment, and it was worth it. The sun was setting, casting golden light across the castle grounds. Catherine stood watching as Alara concluded her meeting and started back toward the castle, waving when she spotted her mother. In that wave, Catherine saw not just her daughter, but generations of wisdom, her father's, her own, and the lessons Alara would someday pass to her own children. The crown's shadow had once seemed so dark, so consuming, but time and trial had transformed it into something else entirely. A legacy of strength born from adversity, wisdom earned through suffering, and love that persisted despite betrayal. That was worth more than any kingdom. As Catherine entered the castle for the evening meal, she felt at peace. The story that had begun with her father's death and her exile had led, through years of struggle and growth, to this moment of quiet fulfillment. She was no longer the frightened young woman cast out by her husband, nor the ambitious girl who'd once thought a crown mattered most. She was simply Catherine, survivor, mother, teacher, and proof that even the darkest circumstances could forge something beautiful and strong. That was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything that truly mattered.